I guess we can get started. So as Pieter mentioned, I'll be covering mainly multimodal models, and then some other stuff which I will outline. But yeah, let's get started. So I guess what are multimodal models very broadly? It's kind of self-explanatory. Models that can incorporate multiple modalities. There's like a lot of different modalities available, but the main ones that people generally work on right now are with images and video, which are very similar if you count it as like images and videos are just like the vision modality. There's text and audio, and there could be more. If you do robotics, there could be other like sensory data. There could be like touch, like tactile sensory. But these are the predominant ones that are currently used right now. I think mostly because it's just due to the availability of data that you can actually just scrape online. Like if you scrape YouTube, you'll have video and audio, and you could get text if you do labeling. Text is easy to scrape, and images are also pretty easy to scrape. And in the end, when we learn these multimodal models, there are some outcomes that we would like. The first is we would obviously want to achieve some sort of multimodal understanding, where you can like understand both images and text and learn how they like interplay together. And then the second one, which is a little bit more difficult, is that we want to achieve better unimodal understanding. So like if I have image data and text data, and I try and train jointly on both these two modalities, can I have a better understanding of just language by itself or just images by itself? And this is a brief outline of the different models I'll be talking about. Most of these will just be, I guess it'll be broadly covering the different kinds of architectures and types of models that people have done and like kind of like how they're trained. There won't be anything new in terms of like generative models. Like we previously covered everything. Most of these are autoaggressive. Sometimes there's diffusion. Those are probably the main two. So we mostly focus on like what kinds of models they are, how they're structured, and also like what capabilities that we're seeing with current like large-scale models like GPT-4 or Gemini, and stuff that they can do and where they might fail. And then, so that's the first four of the different kinds of models that I've kind of like separated. And the last one that I'll just be talking about some parallelization in transformers. This is kind of related to a part of lecture that we were supposed to cover in the LLMs lecture that we didn't get time to. But so we moved it here, and it's a pretty good ending in terms of basically because all these models we're covering are essentially transformers in some form. And the last part is just some practical applications of how you actually parallelize it. If you have like 1,000 devices, how do you train on that? So it could be very useful. Okay, so the first part is on bidirectional models, which bidirectional in this sense that it's just like, let's say, not a causal transformer. So clip we'll just categorize as like bidirectional model. Well, I guess technically the text encoder is causal, but that's not really used in any way right now. And yeah, so we covered clip already. I think Pieter covered it in like the self-supervised or like one of the lectures before. So I won't go into how that works. But it is a contrastive objective, and you learn an image and text encoder, and you can use clip to do some pretty cool things. The original paper did image classification, which is I think the easiest application, where you can just take an image and then you can compute its clip score alignment with different classes, and then classify it according to the class of the highest alignment. One neat thing about this classification that you can actually achieve with these text image models in comparison to, let's say, image only. So let's say if you did like SimClear or something on ImageNet, and then you did like a linear probe or something, or you train a classifier from that pre-trained backbone to classify ImageNet. Something that I don't have the plot here, but something that was interesting that kind of clip showed improvement on was it was a lot more robust than the image-only ones in terms of like how robust it is to certain like distribution changes in images compared to image-only ones. So that's like potentially one benefit of like combining text and images. The other one, which was explored, I believe, in the DALE paper originally, was they used the clip score as a re-ranker. So because essentially you have your image and you have your text, and then you can compute how aligned these two elements are. And for Dolly, what they did was they just would generate, let's say if you had like a text caption and you can generate like maybe like 10 or 100 images. And then if you want to choose one pair from that, you can just compute the clip scores for all 100 pairs and then choose the one that has the highest alignment, which usually works pretty well. This was some work from a J that used to be in our lab. It was like kind of one of the original like text to 3D papers, and it's called Dream Fields. This was in its beginning phases, so it wasn't like, super like crystal clear, but it showed like some pretty cool capabilities in transferring like what Clip understands about language into generating 3D. And what this essentially did was you like it initialized like a nerf parameters, and then you just optimize your nerf parameters to align with a high clip score with a given text caption. So if the text caption was like an armchair in the shape of an avocado, then you would start with like random parameters. You would use a nerf to render, and then you would take like you'd render like an image of it, like an image of the 3D object, and then you would feed that through the clip image encoder and compute the clip score, and then you would backpropagate back to update the nerf parameters. There's some more stuff like nerf specific things to try to encourage it to generate image-like objects, things to encourage like the occupancy of like the resulting 3D structure, but at its core, it's essentially just optimizing clip. And this was like in the very beginnings of like text-to-image stuff, where this was before text-to-image models or text-to-image generation models existed, and this was another way to generate an image, quote-unquote generate from a text caption, where they would do something kind of neat is that they would just essentially just take a VQ-GAN embedding space, and then they would start with like a random like latent. They would feed it through the VQ-GAN decoder, and then like take some crops and feed those crops into the clip image encoder, and then have it aligned with some user specified text caption, and you can generate some kind of like weird images. And then essentially, this is very similar to Dream Fields, where you're optimizing like per data point. So this is you're doing like gradient descent or gradient ascent on the like the VQ GAN latent embedding itself. So there's no like neural net that's being trained here. It's just using all pre-trained models. And you get like some weird things. Like it's very like there's a lot of weird artifacts. You can see a lot of like repetitive patterns, mostly because you're optimizing a clip score, which can have like some really weird areas in like the image space that have really high alignment. But you can get some kind of cool stuff. And then after that, you can also even do clip guidance for diffusion models, and that tends to work well when you actually have a model that actually can generate an image. But yeah, this is like stuff you can use with Clip in terms of like image generation. Why do I have the same slide? All right, let's skip that. Okay. And then there's a lot of other ones in other domains that people have actually used. It's used, first bullet point, it's used as a backbone very commonly. If you take some pre-trained, if you want to train like a vision language model, you generally take like a pre-trained LLM that understands text and a pre-trained, like some sort of pre-trained image encoder that can understand vision, and then you kind of combine them. And then Clip is a very common like vision encoder that's used as like a pre-trained backbone. And yeah, for representations, also kind of as like a pre-trained backbone for like stable diffusion. They cross attend on the text embeddings for like on the text encodings of the Clip text encoder to condition on language. And then the last one is one paper where it's called Clipport, which is a paper where is in the context of robotics, of where they kind of like train like a robotic policy that could do different tasks with some like fancy architecture design. But at its core, it was initialized from the image encoder for Clip. And so what that kind of allowed you to do is you can learn a policy to do stuff on like a subset of objects. So you can ask it to pick up like a red block or like a teddy bear, and then it could generalize to different objects or different colors or stuff that is still in distribution of Clip, but wasn't necessarily trained in the downstream policy. Yeah, and the last point is kind of alludes to that, is that for most cases, you can like have like some small amount of fine-tuning data for a specific task you want to solve, and if you fine-tune with clip, then it could hopefully like generalize to different unseen visual concepts that were not seen during fine-tuning. Yes. So I guess clip is very useful. So in context, like let's say for clipport, it's very useful because there's a language component. So you have a task you specify, put the red block on the green roll. And now it can generalize to a different task that was like, put the teddy bear in the brown box or something, potentially. So in that sense, clip is probably the main useful like text to image encoder that can generalize things. But I'm not sure about like image only probably wouldn't be able to do that well, because you would have to learn the text understanding from scratch, essentially. And okay, so this was another paper called M3AE, and the general way this works is fairly straightforward. If you're familiar with how MAE works, MAE is essentially this top half. So you have your image, and then you mask it out. You feed in the unmasked, or you feed in the unmasked patches through your encoder, and then you try to decode the rest, the original image. M3AE was just that plus text as well. So it's like a MAE plus like BERT, I guess, where you also mask out the language tokens, same architecture style, but now your input to the encoder is just concatenated unmasked image and unmasked text tokens, and then you try to decode the entire like text image pair modality there. And then in this case, you could also, so in this case, you could do it with text image pairs. You could also do it with like image only data. In that case, the text would be fully masked out. You could use text only data. In that case, the images would be fully masked out. So you can use it for any combination of those modalities. But I believe this was mainly trained on text image data. Yeah.
So if you're not sending the mask tokens to the encoder, does that mess up like the positional coding, or is there even any positional coding?
Trying to remember. I don't remember off the top of my head. It could be they add positional encodings first here, and then when it's the patches are selected, it keeps like its relative position in the original image. But I don't remember exactly. I'd have to see the code. Is there another question? Okay, and one neat finding about M3AE, so this was compared to MAE. So MAE just trained on only images. Let's say, yeah, only images, and M3AE trained on both the image and text. And this was the linear probe accuracy, I think, on probably ImageNet. But you do see a very large boost in like the quality, let's say the quality of the representation as a function of how good it is as like a linear probe. Most likely because the caption, like the labels or the targets for ImageNet are all very like more language-like, in the sense of like it's like a type of dog or a type of cat or a car or a truck, which may have facilitated just better representations for this kind of thing. And with fine tuning, there's less of a gap because now you can update all the parameters, but there's still some improvement, especially with you can get away with fine tuning less, like fewer, like a smaller part of the network to get pretty good performance. Yeah. Sorry? Yeah. Yeah. And these are some visualizations of, I believe it's essentially visualizing like you can see that the green, like the green square there is what parts of the text that green square token is attending to. So focus is on the strawberries. Might be too saturated, but that says, well, it says straw, and then might be bear. That looks too long to be berries, but but yeah, something like that. And then the same thing for that thing over there. Can't see the. Oh, okay. So straw, and then pound sign, berries. I don't know why I had those. And then the last one was a roof leaking, and there's like a picture of like the leak, and it focuses on those parts of the word or the sentence. And this was also a visualization of just like the t-SNE plots of like the representations, where it's far better clustered for the M3AE, which had like text supervision, compared to MAE, which you can there are some like clusters, but it's much more scattered than M3AEs. Yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe, yeah, that seems feasible, yeah, likely. Cool. Okay, so those are that class of like bidirectional multimodal models. Now I'll be covering just different kinds of more transformer-focused models, encoder-decoder, decoder-only, and like multimodal generation. But the first one would be kind of like encoder-decoder style models. The first one is Flamingo. So what this one does is, the first thing they do is they leverage a pre-trained language model, so a pre-trained LLM on just pure text data. And then the question is, now I wanted to be able to understand images. So it's like, how do you feed in and condition on images? And Flamingo is one of the slightly more complicated architectural choices. But the way it works is essentially you have like your n layers of your language model. So on the right there, you see like first LM block, nth LM block. And then in between all of them, you essentially insert what they call this gated cross-attention plus dense layer. It's like another gated transformer block, which you can then condition on images. And the way they condition on images is they just have like a vision encoder. I forgot exactly what it was. It might have been some ResNet. And then like a ResNet that was pre-trained on like image classification or some self-supervised objective. It could be whatever. And they used a perceiver resampler, which I'm not sure if we covered perceiver in this class, but at its core, it's just like a transformer-like architecture that will convert like any like variable-sized tokens. So for example, this vision encoder could potentially output different like size tokens depending on the input resolution of the image. If it's like a larger resolution, it could output more tokens. But the perceiver would just process it, so it's like it computes an encoding that is a constant. I think in this case it was 64 tokens per image. And the way they condition on it is they have this gated cross-attention dense layer, which is similar to a standard self-attention layer. So they have, but instead of self-attention, it's cross-attention. So they cross-attend where the query is like the hidden states of your transformer. And then the keys and values is what you're cross-attending to, which is in this case is like the images or the images that you condition on. And then after that, it's the standard feed-forward layer of like a standard transformer block. And the one different thing why they call it gated as well is because they add tanh gating in front of each of the attention and feed forward, where the main purpose of this is that at initialization, the gate will be 0. So when you just start training, the model will behave identically to like the original language model it was initialized from. And then as you train, it will learn how to incorporate like the weights will probably go deviate away from 0 as it learns how to incorporate the image information to help predict the text that it needs to predict. So one thing about this model and a lot of models I'll be talking about is that these models still only generate text, but just learn how to condition on images. So they can't generate images. They only can generate text. And this is an example of some of the capabilities they showed for Flamingo. So this is kind of like something kind of like in-context learning or like task specification. So it's like an image. This is a chinchilla. This is a Shiba. and then it's asking you to like to fill out the like it's like providing the first two examples as an example of like what the task is, and then asks you to solve the new task that it's of like the novel image it is. And other stuff like for different formatting. So what's the title of this? Where is this painting? Stuff like that for QA. And this is like implicit, like kind of like an OCR task. You're giving examples of OCR for reading signs, and you ask it to solve a new one, which is a new sign. Some other cool things. Top one is kind of, I guess it's like kind of like video understanding. If you just concatenate like a sequence of frames. In this case, you probably can't add too many frames, but you can ask a question about like this video, and then it can try to answer it. You can have conversational things about an image, and yeah, you can have multiple questions about some image, asking about certain aspects of it and other stuff. And these are the quantitative results they had. Pretty much like pretty far outperforming some previous like zero few shot state-of-the-art algorithms. The dash line is the state-of-the-art for like a fine-tuned model, like a kind of like benchmark specific fine-tuned model. So for some of them, it was still underperforming zero shot to like the actual like fine-tuned state-of-the-art, and for some of the other tasks, it was outperforming it. And on the right here, it was generally one of the first studies, I guess, on like the scalability and capabilities of these models and what happens as you scale, which, as you can kind of expect, the model gets better and better as you scale. And this was mostly scaling the LLM part of the network. Okay. This is another kind of, this is closer to a more formal like encoder-decoder style network that we see called Pali. So pretty straightforward architecture is you just have your image, you have a vision transformer, which will basically essentially tokenize the image into like 256 tokens. And then you would concatenate it with the language embeddings and feed it through the transformer encoder. And that would output the representation for essentially the question. So usually the input would be like some question plus an image, and then the decoder would answer the question or to generate text conditioned on the encoder output. So this is very similar to like the original intention is all you need, like encoder-decoder architecture, but just incorporating images. And this one, they had like a similar trend as Flamingo, where like the more scale you have, the better. In this, they also did scale the vision component as well. You can see like VIT-G, VIT-G, and VIT-E. And then another huge benefit, which we'll see like quite frequently in all these future works, is that like if you want to get a good performance boost from a model, like you can scale your model, but another option is also to scale your like the resolution of the image that you're inputting, which will give you for some of these pretty large boosts, especially let's say like text caps probably has a really large boost in performance. And that could be understandable because it's mostly like kind of like an OCR / like document reading potentially kind of task where you need like finer grained patches to understand like the text as like in pixel form. But yeah, so I guess in the end, if you want improved performance, there could be multiple ways to add flops to your model essentially. In the end, it's like if you add flops, it will probably be better. And one way is to increase the size of your model with parameter count, and the other way could be to just add flops through higher resolution. Because generally, the higher resolution you have, the more tokens you have, or the longer sequence length your transformer, so you have more flops there as well. But with no change in parameter count. And after Pali, there were a few other papers throughout last few years. So Pali X, I won't go too deep into these, but most of it was just like better results through further scaling, more tinkering with the training schemes of like doing mixtures of different like self-supervised objectives and different like they had a lot of different like kind of like denoising tasks, and like the language model training, further training with OCR objectives on the vision encoder, which I think that was just essentially just OCR training for like unimodal for the image encoder part, and which did transfer well to better OCR in the downstream model. Pali 3 I think that goal was to basically build a smaller model that was also very capable. So before they were using, I think, a text encoder trained on OCR plus some like JFT, like their image classification, like the image classification data set they have at Google. But they switched to SIGLIP, which does a lot of large-scale text image training. And they had other things like a better data mixture of what kind of like OCR, like high-quality OCR data, other sorts of high-quality data going to higher resolutions. This paper, I believe they did like progressive, I think most of these papers did. Like Pali X and Pali 3 both did it, but they do like progressive training on higher and higher resolutions. Pali 3, the largest resolution they trained on was like around like 1,000 by 1,000 images. And yeah, so the end result was pretty neat, is that they had pretty similar performance to Pali X while being around 10 times smaller. So Pali X was like 55 billion and Pali 3 is like 5 billion. Yeah. I'm not entirely, so I think in the end, I'm not 100% sure, but I think what ends up happening is that the encoder can accept essentially a variable resolution, but what happens is you just have like more tokens as output. And then so that the downstream transformer, or as you train the entire model, it can accept like a different sequence length, essentially. Cool. That was the encoder-decoder. Decoder-only is probably more common, especially in like the larger scale models nowadays. This was one of the first papers that explored this back, I don't know, like 3 years ago, called Frozen. And very simple idea. So it's also taking a pre-trained language model. In this case, you take your vision encoder. They used like a very simple like ResNet encoder. Even the language model in that case, in that time, wasn't very good. This was just kind of like a proof of concept kind of thing. They have their text image data and they fine tune on it. So in this case, the image followed by, let's say, the caption. And then everything is frozen except the vision encoder, which is fine tuned. And the whole thing is trained on like the next token prediction loss for language. And these are some of the stuff they do, very similar to like, let's say, Flamingo, which was kind of around a similar time, of like doing VQA, like few shot, like yeah, and like few shot tasks where you can specify like interleave data. Interleave data is something that is more difficult to do in the encoder-decoder style models because it's not clear how you would structure the input for encoder-decoder. But for decoder-only, you can just treat the sequence as like a continuous stream of like tokens that you can concatenate to. So it's much easier to have like these kinds of like task specifications if you want to mix images and language together. And after Frozen, this was more recent after, let's say, LLaMA came out from Meta, and then there were more like instruct fine-tune. So Vicuna is an example of a fine-tuned version of LLaMA that was designed to like follow language instructions. And so you can do a similar thing. If you want a similar model for images, what you can do is, these are pretty close to concurrent works, MiniGPT-4 and LLaVA, is that you can take your Vicuna-based model, which is essentially LLaMA, freeze it, and then you can take some sort of vision encoder. So MiniGPT uses this VIT plus Q former, which is from a paper called Blip2. And LLaVA uses a clip image encoder, and then in between they have like a single like projection layer that basically maps the dimensionality to the input of like the Vicuna transformer. And in most cases, in this case, the only thing you train is like the projection layer, and it actually works pretty well in terms of like multimodal understanding. And this is pretty cheap because a lot of stuff is frozen and very little is actually fine-tuned. The actual training scheme for LLaVA was a little bit more complicated than MiniGPT-4. They broke into 2 stages. So in the first stage, you train on a slightly larger set of like 600K text image pairs, and you freeze the vision and language backbones, and you only train the projection layer. So that's like what MiniGPT-4 does. And then stage 2, what you can do is you have like a lot more concentrated, like high quality instruct data, like well curated, a lot smaller number, where then you can fine tune the entire thing, except in this case, they also just kept the vision backbone still frozen. But the important thing was they also just fine tuned the language model itself, which in general, you should be able to have a lot better performance just because you're fine tuning a larger portion of the model. And these are some examples that they had, some pretty cool ones. So, oh wait, was this a? Oh no. So okay, let's skip this. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, and then they had some future. They had like more iterations of this work. They had LLaVA 1.5, which larger resolution. They saw better performance. They instead of like a linear projection layer, they just did an MLP. And then maybe like a 2-layer MLP. And then they had just better instruct data with just better VQA data, OCR data, stuff like that to get better performance. And they had some benchmarkings against like some prior models here. And in general, performs pretty strongly, especially like what I kind of see is like, for example, this model here with 80 billion parameters still performs like quite a bit worse than LLaVA. So for most of these cases, you can actually get really strong performance just by curating really good data, especially if you look at performance in comparison to some of the other models with the same number of parameters, like LLaVA 1.5 with 7B versus some of the other 7B models, and even against some of the larger models. So in this case, like size does help, but then also like very high quality data curation and careful training can actually go a long way. And for LLaVA 1.6 that they released semi-recently, they had like the main novelty here was a different way to partition your input image. And the way they do it is, especially if you want to support really large resolution images, is that after a certain point where your image resolution is too large, what they do is they just tile your image into tiles of like smaller resolution images, and then they encode those separately. And then they flatten and concatenate everything as input. And then they also have a kind of like a downsampled representation version, where they downsample it to the tile size, and then they encode it as input as well. So you both have like this kind of like downsampled information that has potentially like more higher level information about the image, and then they have like the really fine-grained details of like the original high resolution image, which could be really useful for like document understanding, where you have like a lot of really small characters. And this was some of the benchmarks they had. Like the last row called LLaVA Next. This one they also scaled up to 34B. And in general has pretty strong performance, especially as an open source model compared to some of the other ones. Even against some of like for Gemini and GPT-4. Yeah. Perhaps. I think it's mainly, data might not be an issue. I think it's mainly just like a way to add flops to your model that can make it essentially just like do more computation per image that enables it to generally perform better. Data-wise, I mean, you can always do more like potentially even like unimodal training on higher resolution images, or even multimodal training. So I don't think that's too much of an issue. And usually, I guess one other point is that higher resolution, there is more information, but it's also not like significantly more information than like a 256 by 256 image or something. Okay. Brief, I guess, like guesswork I'll characterize as what GPT-4V is doing. Because I think the LLaVA 1.6 like tiling thing I mentioned was mostly, I think they mentioned in their blog post, it was probably inspired by how GPT-4v potentially does it. They don't say anything about it, but you can guess from their pricing model. Which if you play around, because they have this vision calculator here, which basically tells you this input resolution, or for this input resolution image, how many tokens it is. In this case, it's like 255 tokens for this 512 by 512. And from that, you can kind of infer. So if you use like the low resolution one, you'll get 85 tokens. And then the full resolution 512 by 512, you get 255, which is probably like 85 low resolution tokens plus like 170 other tokens, or like higher resolution tokens. And then if you input any larger image than 512 by 512, so like 513 by 513, what ends up happening is that it gets like a very similar tiled behavior. So 513 by 513 would end up still being 4 tiles because it rounds up to the nearest 512, essentially. So it'll kind of process it as like a 1024 by 1024 image. And so this is like very similar to how LLaVA 1.6 is done, and it's probably how GPT-4v does something kind of like this. But all hypothetical. And in terms of capabilities, there's a pretty few, I guess, neat category of things that they can do. There's like the GPT-4, and same thing with GPT-3 and language models, is that you can kind of act as a knowledge bank. In this case, you have a knowledge bank of more visual information. So it knows what a penny is. It knows like what like this plant is, and then maybe even like more famous shots or shots of like a city with like famous landmarks that it will know where it's located. You can do OCR. There was this one that was pretty popular on Twitter, I think, when GPT-4v came back. This really complicated no parking sign. Basically a constraint satisfaction problem where you ask it, oh, where can I actually, or what time can I actually park? Or can I park in it right now? And then its goal is to try to interpret all these weird things and to figure out, oh, when I can actually park. And then other stuff of like, because GPT-4v, they also had like a pretty neat series of benchmarks on like different tests, different AP exams, SAT, bar exams, stuff like that. It can also do that, which is a combination of like high-level reasoning of like and like visual understanding of reading like certain diagrams, certain text, and then doing processing to try to answer the question. This was not exactly the same one that they showed in the original demo, but I think someone else tried. But you can also potentially even have like a mock diagram and then ask it to output code that follows this diagram. It's obviously probably not perfect, and it probably has a lot of error, or it can only do easy things, but pretty cool capability, at least to start with. And yeah, these are some examples, I believe, from their like safety or system card, but it's like not perfect. It does, as all of these models do, they do hallucinate. So a lot of these, they can just sound very, I mean, reading this, even I don't know if it's correct or not, because I don't understand like bio or chem. But in these cases, I guess it is still wrong if like an expert verifies, or for these cases about like scans of brain images, where it's sometimes wrong, but also sometimes right, which is not very desirable behavior if you want to be able to trust it. Cool, and so that was GPT-4. There's Gemini 1.5, which was essentially focused on longer context models. Again, we don't know what it is. They mentioned some stuff about discrete models, maybe VQ plus COCA. So it could be some sort of like discrete autoencoder that was trained something similar to COCA, which COCA does a combination of image captioning plus text-to-image contrastive objective. So you can almost think of it as like part of it is just like a VQ version of CLIP, I guess. Okay. Yeah. So mainly one thing is that their embedding could be discrete. I don't know. I mean, it is discrete, and then it also probably had like some sort of like text image like supervision in the autoencoder's training. And this was, yeah, so these are some of the initial results they had. This was focused on their long context focus of their model, where they can process very long video, 1 minute to 1 hour. And this is a very classical like needle retrieval problem. It was very common at first in language models, where basically you insert like some, like you have like a document of like 1 million tokens, and then you insert some random fact or some random number. Like let's say the magic number is like 178362, and then you ask it, oh, what is the magic number? And then, so it's essentially like a retrieval problem in like this long document. They did a similar thing for video. I think the way they constructed this one was you have like a 6 minute or 1 hour video, and then in like a subset of the frames in a very narrow range, like randomly in the video, they inserted a like kind of like an overlay caption of saying, oh, the magic number is whatever at different depths. So depth is where the needle or the magic number is inserted, and then the x-axis here is just the length of the video that it was trying to process and retrieve from. And in general, I mean, the task is not too hard, but still pretty impressive that it can actually do this pretty perfectly over really long contexts. And I think that one even went up to, yeah, on the right, went up to 10 hours, which is pretty crazy. And these are some, like, I guess still I would categorize as retrieval tasks, but ones that make more sense, or ones that are more natural. So this one is you feed in like a video, like a 40-minute video of this Sherlock Holmes movie. And then you can ask it a question. So it's like, tell me some of the information about the piece of paper that's removed from the person's pocket and the time code of the moment. And then it can process this video and find that exact moment and time code as well. So I imagine they probably had some sort of like fine-tuning data that was similar in nature to this that they potentially collected. Not sure if it would just work. Well, I guess you would have to have some sort of fine-tuning data no matter what. And the other one, which is pretty cool, so this one was like a visual retrieval. So someone drew like a really, just like a sketch of like this water tanker with water pouring out of it, and then it was asking you to find this moment in the video or in the movie. And then it can find like the visually corresponding scene that looks very similar, which is pretty cool. And this is some more stuff on long context, like more quantitative results for some benchmarks. I think 1 hour video QA is one of the nearly ones they created, where if you're processing long videos, so there's like multiple ways to process long videos. So for example, if my video model can only take in 16 frames, then I can technically process a 1 hour long video if I take 16 frames, like stride it across that 1 hour. It's just very sparsely selected. But ideally, in this case, the more dense frames that you can sample and process from, the more complex questions you can answer, or the more like advanced capabilities you can have or understand about the video. So in this case, they kind of, at least for their first benchmark, they showed like improving capability as you had inputted more frames into the model. And then for ego schema, it kind of like saturated after a little bit. But those are also much shorter videos as well, 3 minutes. Okay, that was decoder-only models. So now I will be talking quickly about multimodal generation. And the way I'm phrasing multimodal generation is a lot of like the models we talked about in this entire class are usually generating one modality. They could be conditioned on multiple modalities, but it's usually generating one. So there's like stable diffusion, generates only images from text. These video generation models only generate video. Video Poet is probably one exception where they generate video audio. But now it's the question is like, can we have a model that can like generate any number of modalities? So we can generate both text and image, or generate image from text or text from image. Have a single model that does all of this. And this model I will be briefly talking about, which was pretty neat. It was called CODI, I guess, any-to-any generation. And the goal for this paper was we have images, videos, language, and audio. And can we generate any of these modalities conditioned on any of those modalities? So I feed it in an image and a text caption, I want to generate video. Or image and audio and generate a text caption. or basically any of these combinations of input and output. And I'll only briefly talk about this. If you're interested, you can probably read more about it or see the examples they have on their site. But the way they do this is, so they have like a lot of stages of training. And the first thing they do is they learn a joint embedding space. That basically, the goal is to learn a single embedding space where all of these modalities are aligned. So one example of that is CLIP. So CLIP is a text-image model that learns a joint embedding space for text and images that is like more or less aligned to be the same, and almost sometimes like interchangeable to some extent. But in this case, we want to learn one for multiple modalities, and the way in this paper they did it was a pretty simple approach that has some pros and cons, but they just had everything bridged through text because it's moderately easy to find like X modality plus text. So they have like text and video. So they learn like a clip thing for text and video. I think the training process was they basically just freeze or they train the text encoder once and then they freeze it for all the other ones and then align to it. And then they use like text to image data to learn the image encoder, text to audio data to learn the audio encoder. All of which basically image, like these data sets kind of exist already. So you can just download them and use them. And then they, I guess like stage 1, part 2 is they then just train this, they train individual generation models. So they train like a vision model conditioned on text, an audio model conditioned on text, and so on. And then stage 2 gets a little bit more complicated, where basically, because the goal is you want to be able to condition on not just text, but also audio or video or something. But it's a lot easier to manage now once you have like this aligned lane space, since all of the representations are very similar to each other when they have the same meaning. So they basically, essentially what they have here is, I won't go too deep into it, is that they have some extra fine tuning of these models to incorporate the conditioning of the other modalities. And then in this case, there is like a predefined alignment here, because in this case, you can see it's like a frozen vision encoder, whereas before you used the frozen text encoder. But in this case, since the vision and text are kind of aligned, those vectors are kind of like interchangeable, or you can interpolate between them, and it will more or less work. It's not like exactly aligned, but it's good enough that you can kind of just interchange them. And then you can use this fact to be able to condition on multiple things when you generate. Okay, and then there's like another set of works that is a little bit more simpler. These focus on mainly just image generation and image captioning. So you can feed in text to generate image, or you can feed an image to also answer questions about. And the way they do this is similar to the different kinds of like multimodal models we've seen before, kind of like LLaVA or mini GPT-4, where you have like your clip encoder of the image that you can feed in as tokens, concatenate with text. And then now, in addition to the next token prediction of like the language, what you have on the bottom there is you have essentially a regression. So it will regress the clip embeddings for the image that it wants to generate. Now, the output of that, when you do regression on like this kind of like very like on like it's a very complex distribution, in the end it'll kind of regress to the mean. So it won't produce very good. It won't like correspond to very good images. So what they additionally fine tune is like a fine tuned version of Stable Diffusion that will condition on like the output latents from the regression, and then to generate like a more higher quality image. And so that's what EMU does. The LLaVA, the other one, they, instead of doing a regression, they quantize the clip embeddings, and then they do like an autoregressive prediction. And they still have, because in this sense they're using the clip embeddings. And the one thing about clip embeddings that is not ideal for generation is that clip is kind of like a lossy encoder. So you won't be able to preserve, it doesn't preserve everything about the original image. So for example, if I took the clip encoder, I froze it, and then I try to train a decoder on those clip embeddings, to try to reconstruct the original image, it won't be like perfect. It will look like maybe like a blurry version of the image, but it won't be really high quality. So they still use like a stronger decoder to model that randomness, in a sense, to model the information that is lost from the clip encoder. And oh yeah, and these are the different tasks that they had. So it can basically do any sort of like image to text or text to image task. So doing some sort of like captioning, you can do some sort of VQA stuff. You can also, in the end, generate images. And in the end, you have this model that can do both of these things. And then how you actually want to elicit these responses in terms of, oh, how does the model know when to generate images? How does it know when to generate text? That's all more or less just done through fine tuning of like the type of fine tuning data you curate, where you have like potentially like certain phrases, or it tries to learn from this fine tuning data when it should be generating the image versus when it should be generating text. This was the video version of LLaVA. Very similar in structure, where they have they still concatenate visual and text tokens together. They just have a fancier vision encoder. They have like the keyframes from like an MP4, and then MP4 also has some motion vector information, kind of like optical flow, that they then like quantize. But the way you generate a video is still just like autoaggressive next token prediction on these discrete latents. And then they also learn like another decoder on top of it, fine-tuned from like stable video diffusion. And this was some work that we did recently in our lab, which is just a simpler incarnation. Essentially, instead of using clip latents, which are lossy, we just use a VQ-GAN and just concatenate the image tokens together. And then during training, if you have like a bunch of text image or text video data, you can like swap the order of the text tokens and vision tokens, because then sometimes it'd be doing image generation, sometimes it'd be doing image captioning. And then during fine-tuning, for chat fine-tuning, you can then basically design data around to encourage certain behaviors. Cool. Yeah, I think, well, I guess in the end, the ultimate challenge is that a lot of these models still have issues in terms of they hallucinate. They have like there are errors in visual understanding, especially video understanding, stuff like that. Like video understanding, there's like a lot more work to do in terms of understanding hierarchically how a movie operates, what's happening in this movie, stuff like that. That I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of like this kind of understanding.